Hello, hello, testing, testing. Great. Everybody, thanks for coming tonight. My name is Brian Kellenberger. I'm the Director of Beach Operations. Beach Operations, our department does the beach maintenance and beach code enforcement for the beaches of Walton County. Tonight's meeting is a public workshop to take in input from the public on how Walton County manages the beach. You know, how well we do it, what we can do better, any solutions that would make, what I call creating harmony on the beach. So tonight's meeting will be what I call a town hall type meeting. And so I'll go through a few statistics of what we do on the beach as far as vendors, our current projects on creating beach access, renovating our existing beach accesses, and then we'll open it up for people to speak. And the normal way we do it is you present the issue you have or the problem you have, offer up a viable resolution or solution to it, and then we can discuss it. I will probably offer up, the how, the when, and the why we do it, or why we don't do it, to help you understand better and help formulate a better solution. And then we'll take this input, combine it with input from other meetings and from what our department sees throughout the year, and we combine all that into recommendations for the Board of County Commissioners to consider. And so, but before we get started, there's going to be some difference of opinion in this room tonight. So I ask that everybody respect the other opinions and attitudes, and more importantly, respect the other person. If you got any cell phones or anything, if you can quiet them, I'd appreciate it. If you got to take a call, take it outside. If you want to talk with your neighbor, you can carry that on outside as well. We'll pass the microphone around. So John Callens will help me do that. John is one of our beach ambassadors. And the reason we do that is because we're on audio and video. And some people are watching live tonight, and some people will want to watch it later on at their own leisure to see what we talked about. So as you're talking, be concise, on the point, and we'll get through the meeting. Everybody should have a chance to talk tonight if they'd like to. So that's it. Any questions about the purpose of the meeting or the format or anything like that? Okay. This meeting is kind of a sister meeting. We had one earlier, or we had one last week that was our post-season vending meeting. It's primarily geared for vendors to offer up, the good and the bad and the ugly of the year, and offer recommendations for change. This one is, formatted for the general public to come and talk, and so I encourage everybody to say what's on your mind. So a few stats from last year, or from this past year. This year we had 163 permitted vendors compared to 104 last year. We had 381 permits issued. Some vendors have more than one permit, obviously. Last year we had 272. They're spread out amongst all the categories of vending on the beach. We have equipment vendors, some that just do bonfires, some that have more specific beach recreation like water sports, jet skis, parasails. A few service ones like yoga, security, and of course wedding events. Photography is a very big category now. All the people that don't put stuff on the beach, we call those miscellaneous vendors. They have a little bit reduced fee, but we still capture them so that they can be within our system and get all the information about what's going on. So far this year, so our fiscal year runs from October 1st to September, into September. So my data that I have right now is through the end of August, so it's not complete. But so far this year, we've had 9,187 contacts. That's our beach code enforcement contacts. Not all of those are code enforcement related. Some of them are calls, meetings, or what we call citizens contact, where we may have just given out some information. Subtract those out, it leaves 7,690 actual enforcement contacts. That's where we got out and talked with somebody about behavior on the beach. By and large, glass, 790 contacts. Dogs, 2,090 contacts. Um, the rest of the stuff is fairly small. We have several categories for vendors. All in all, less than 400 or 500 contacts for all of vendor items. Bonfires, very large item, 2,156 contacts. Interesting stat on that is that over 92% of the time the bonfires were compliant. So just because we're stopping and talking to somebody doesn't mean that we've observed a non-compliant behavior. It means that we're checking that what they're doing, that they are in compliance. Dogs, you'll see us stopping and checking dog permits. About half the time we check a dog, they are compliant or the owner is compliant. There's several ways they can be non-compliant. It can be no permit, out of the designated time, off a leash, not cleaning up waste. Rest of it, like I say, fairly insignificant things that we do. We do have some parking or driving issues down at Grayton Beach, but by and large, most people are compliant in those. We do find a few permits that aren't permanently affixed, or they're bogus, or they're handicap permits and the handicapped person is not in the car with them. So this information is available. If anybody would like it, they can just email me or email Tricia at visitsouthwalton.com, and she will email you this. You might want to wait until we compile the whole year, and I did include this in the annual report. So we publish an annual report that gives you all the activity, complaints, type of complaints, and then this summarized data is actually broken down by category, and then disposition. Disposition is what was the outcome of the contact. Verbal warning, written warning, citation, no violation found. We have another category and all that. But it's good information, gives you an idea of what we're doing. Beach maintenance-wise, our beach maintenance guys pick up garbage 7 days a week. As you all probably heard, we had some issues after July 1st with people giving us cease and desist letters to not traverse their property. At first, we discontinued garbage at all private properties, discontinued garbage collection. We were able to revisit with some of those property owners. They rescinded their letter. It's opened up about 65, maybe 70% of the beach. There's an area in between Watercolor and Paradise by the Sea, which is down near Alice Beach, that we can't get to right now. The issues that keep us from getting there are access onto the beach and then not being able to get across these people's property to get to the other properties. We have limited drive-on points where we can get our trucks on and off the beach, and we're also compromised by coastal dune lakes. When they are open up, sometimes we can cross, sometimes, a lot of times we can't. So we have been working with those remaining property owners to come to some sort of agreement as to how we could traverse their property. But I received word earlier this week that we're not going to be able to reach an agreement with them. And so it's unfortunate. We'll have to let the customary use play out the rest of the way, or have some other legal direction. When I say legal direction, I mean from our legal department to us, to what we can do or what we should do. We'll, our communications department will be putting out this information as we go along, and of course we update the BCC every 2 weeks at their regular meeting, and the TDC at their regular bi-monthly meeting, and of course in between if necessary. So keep a look on our website. The beach operations page is about 2 or 3 clicks back. Should be able to get to it from an icon on the front page. It's got a lot of information on there. The other thing we do at beach maintenance is all of our capital improvement projects, which are maintain all the existing beach accesses, build new beach accesses, maintain and rebuild the multi-use path on the scenic corridors, and we do take care of some right-of-way maintenance on 98 and soon to be on 331. We do that by contract, but our department's in charge of it. All of our existing regional beach accesses and neighborhood beach accesses have been under design and permit to do a facelift renovation. So that'll be new deck boards and new handrails and new structure as required. So we have almost all of the permitting done, and we're starting to bid out those projects, and you'll start to see those projects come under construction. And so in certain areas of our beach, those accesses will be closed down temporarily while we do this facelift renovation. Part of it, the reason was for doing that is it was time to do it. Most of these accesses were rebuilt after Hurricane Dennis in 2006. And a few of them a little bit later after that, but they were starting to show wear. And the other reason is they weren't all standard. And so now all of them, as they get they get rebuilt, they'll all be standard. Standard design on handrails, standard design on the signage that's all out the front, bike racks. We've been slowly moving in that direction anyway, but now as each one of them is rebuilt, when you're at a public beach access, you'll know you're at a public beach access. We're also at our neighborhood beach accesses, we're looking at increasing what I call the portal opening. Right now, some of our beach accesses are hard to find, and so part of that is putting in more bike racks and defining a area that is the opening to the beach access. We have purchased a lot of property lately in the form of Gulffront property and some parking areas. So right now we have 3 new regional beach accesses under design and permit. One's in Dune Allen, we're close to where Stinky's is. The other one is in Seagrove Beach, across from Cafe 30A, and the other one is in Miramar Beach, across from the Amalfi Coast condominium complex. All of those will have bathroom and parking areas, boardwalk, dune walkover, rinse showers, benches, bike racks, and a few other amenities. Dune Allen one bids out here next couple of weeks, and you'll see construction started in about 4 to 6 weeks on that. The Amalfi Coast is about 30% designed and permitted. Take about another 4 to 6 months to finish its permitting. Then we'll bid it out and build it. Seagrove Beach, we just got the conceptual design approved, and we're working on design development. It'll be about 8 to 10 months on permitting on that one, and then we'll bid it out and build it. We also received direction today to look at some other properties, some for parking in close relation to regional beach accesses, and some to build new beach access. So Walton County is trying to overcome the customary use thing in several ways. One of them is following the outline in House Bill 631. The other one is simply buying property and developing it into beach accesses. So that's what we do with beach maintenance and beach code enforcement. I touched pretty much on it. We have 11 officers cover the beach from 5:30 in the morning to 11 or 11:30 at night. We do have an online complaint form that we, some code issues we only accept complaints on. It's how we, service that issue. We are proactive in other ways. You'll see our guys on the beach. Customary use issues have caused us to change our way of maneuvering down the beach. Now you'll see us more on foot and on ATV and less on white trucks driving all the way down the beach. We hope that as customary use comes back into play, that we're allowed to get back on the beach and enforce it the way we used to or in a similar fashion. I truly believe that the presence on the beach is what makes people compliant. Writing citations and warnings does help to a certain extent, but it seems that my experience is that if people know they're going to encounter us that day, they'll be compliant. So, is there any questions about what we do with beach maintenance or beach code enforcement? Any questions about beach accesses? Okay, we'll start the room here, talk about it. And so tonight's meeting, like I said, is all things beach. It can certainly center around a few components of what happens on the beach, but don't be afraid to ask any questions about the beach. So once again, if you'll speak to the microphone, I'd appreciate. We'll get started. John's going to pass the microphone around.
My question just was, do you have the dates outlined when you're going to shut down each regional access to do the facelift so that we kind of know ahead of time, or is that still in the works?
Good question. So as we bid them out, we have them bidding out in lots. And so there's usually 4 or 5 per construction contract. And in that, we've written that only 2 at a time can be out of service. And what we are working with, we'll work with contractors on is, start demo this one, demo crew moves to this one, you start rebuilding this one back before you can leapfrog to the other one. And we've also done it so that there's no, that we don't affect one area of the beach too much. See what I'm saying? But as we do get those contracts online and we start developing the schedule, we'll communicate through our usual channels of which beach accesses are going to be closed and when they're going to be closed. Now, that obviously is not going to be a big, ahead of time notification, probably 30 days. But, and we'll attempt to do it, to the best we can to make sure everybody understands it. It's a good question. Yes, ma'am. John? Is the microphone on? Is that microphone on?
At the last vendor meeting, a vendor who has his chairs on private property was very honest with me and came up and said, I don't feel comfortable telling people to leave on private property, but he's doing it. I have a solution, don't do it, but legally, what are vendors allowed to tell visitors, locals, to leave private property, or does the owner do that, or the sheriff? It puts the vendor in an awkward position, but what's the county's stance on that?
Okay, so the county stance is we have to abide by Florida law. All right, so Florida law has very specific provisions in it for people to protect their private property. House Bill 631 strengthened some of those existing code, but it actually offered up remedy for what's known as ejectment, and that is getting people to leave your private property.
But who should do that?
So the owner has
the owner.
Well, the owner has the right to do it because they're the owner of the property,
Right.
but they can convey that right to a authorized representative, and lo and behold, the contracted vendor for a specific place permit, private property, makes a very easy person to employ to do that. They're already down there. They have product on the beach that they can use to help cordon off the beach. And they also have a little bit of authority over that beach, depending on which vendors it is. They, dressed in their logo, and they're authorized representatives of that property owner, and they have the right to ask somebody to leave the private property.
Okay, if customary use prevails through the court, then a visitor would have the right to put their blanket and just sit on the beach and not be told to leave.
Right. So customary use is, by definition, what its name is. Customary use of the beach. Normally, these customary use comes with a heavy use restrictions, just like we had in our code. There were certain things you could do, and there were certain things you specifically could not do. And so acting within those parameters is how they would be allowed to stay or not allowed to stay.
Thank you.
I just have a couple questions. If customary use does pass and it's a free beach to set your blanket on, is there vending going to be allowed on those beaches? Because it's all public now?
Right. So there would not be vending allowed by the general public. There would be vending allowed by owner authorization. So in other words, the people that have private property would authorize a vending, just like they do a specific place.
Before,
right.
I guess,
But no, the delivery vendor that does not have authorization to vend on that property couldn't come over there and set up chairs.
Okay. The trash pickup, Like I think of the Retreat or these private, larger communities that aren't developments like St. Joe or Watercolor or Watersound. And I don't know which ones have receptacles on them, but does the county pay for that to be picked up? I know there's issues right now
Mm-hmm.
because of you'd mentioned earlier,
Right.
but does the TDC or the code enforcement, do you guys pick that trash up? And are there additional fees that these communities pay to have those receptacles maintained and picked up?
Right. Okay, so before customary use, we had our, what I call our garbage collection station. That's our holder with the paper bag. And we would install those at any properties that requested them on the beach. Primarily, okay, so we have them at all of our public beach accesses. And then majority of the rest of them on private property are bed tax collectors. There are some that are not bed tax collectors, but we felt as a TDC that it was in the best interest of all the beach to allow to offer garbage collection service there. So no, they don't pay an extra charge, nor is there a enumerated, budget or fee or associated cost within the bed tax collection system that is prescribed to garbage collection. I do have a budget number for garbage collection,
Sure.
but we don't say, you're a bed
Yeah,
tax
that makes
collector
sense.
and part of the 4 pennies or 4 cents that we collect, X amount is for garbage collection.
Okay, one of my main reasons being here this evening is it was discussed the other day in the vendor workshop, but is to note for the upcoming meeting the concern of delivery vendors and the manned beach vendors, basically, meaning that these delivery vendors drop off their beach chairs and they leave. They make revenue on public property. They leave all their workshop, their business there all day. Sure, they pay a fee to the county, but I think David, his last name from Rosemary Beach, really eloquently said, the difference of a dad showing up and claiming steak than a public beach or a beach vendor dropping off beach chairs and making revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the overall aggravation from someone that isn't a beach vendor to go to the beach, and you're fighting for beach space and you're fighting for someone's making money. And those of us that have brick and mortar beach or brick and mortar businesses that generate tax revenue, you have a lot of compliances you have to go through where you can't leave your assets and all of your inventory spread out and expect for the lifeguard to break it down whenever the umbrellas are popping and the locals to help out, because it's also there's a lot of dangers there. I mentioned the other day as far as the umbrellas popping. So I think a big discussion, which it seems like that's been a topic. I know from Matt with the Turtle Association seems like the unmanned areas are the problem, and then the delivery beach vendors are also the more unaccountable. So I just wanted to note that.
Okay.
Those that weren't here.
Yeah, like you said, that's been a topic. How vendors manage themselves or how vendors are managed at the public beach access. Current business practice is they drop off in the morning, pick it up in the evening, and it does create some issues being unattended. And I think that a lot of the discussion we've had and some of the solutions that have been presented are viable. And I expect to have robust discussion with the next two, the advisory committee, the TDC is advisory committee to BCC, and then most certainly at the BCC meeting when it does get presented for consideration and then get presented again for actual code revision.
What are, I guess that was something that wasn't talked about the other day, was what are those solutions? I mean, there's obviously a solution of, you either man it or
Right.
that's it. Are there other solutions that have been brought up?
There actually is some other solutions that were not talked about in that meeting. So in that meeting we had last week, it was what's often considered as the managed beach vendor program. And that is where you have one vendor on the beach or if the public beach can handle more than one vendor, we'll call it a vendor slot. And then there's specific ways that they are able to use that beach. And some of the key components of that are attendant on duty. Equipment doesn't get set out until the customer gets there. And then if the customer is leaving for the day or for what would be considered a long period of time, the equipment will be picked up again and then put back out as people needed it. There'll also be some use mandates on how the equipment can be set up. Part of that would be recognizing that the general public should have opportunity to come down to that beach and not, if they don't want to rent equipment. Storage, there would be storage solutions similar to what the specific vendor has now, a storage box, of a certain size, certain placement, color and all that. More than likely some sort of attendant booth or pavilion of appropriate size that would allow them some area to get out of the heat and to do their vending from on that beach. Another solution that has been presented that was not talked about is a form of co-op program where vendors would basically have a co-op program where they would supply labor resources to the public beach so that there could be an attendant on duty. So most of the solutions come down to having somebody there that will manage those chairs during the day when they're not being used.
Has the option of not having any beach vendors on the public beach accesses been an option
No,
or a solution?
not really, because I mean, to some people that would seem like a viable solution, but the reality is that there's a lot of people north of 30A that like to use vendor service. And so there wouldn't be that many chairs out there if people didn't want to use them. And so
But couldn't one of the solution to that, by not having the beach vendors on the beach with beach storage and beach boxes, would be to deliver the beach chairs to the beach access, to the actual boardwalk, or to bring it down to the beach, not to store inventory on public beach. They used to provide a service. I think Chip brought it up the other day, how it used to be, you'd bring it to their house. Obviously that's a little difficult, especially if you're toting a bunch of kids.
Right.
But a solution would be to bring chairs to the public beach access, not on the actual beach. You're still providing a service.
Yeah,
In my
I see what you're
opinion,
saying.
That would be the solution from the public perspective, to not have vending on public beaches.
Right, I see what you're saying. That definitely could be included in the list of recommendations. Whenever we put forth these recommendations, there's always a list of ways to get to an end. And so I understand what you're saying, and that's actually, I believe, what the original, like Chip said, was the original delivery vendor system, is you brought a product to the house, and then the people that were renting that house managed that product on a daily basis. As all things go in South Walton, people are willing to pay a price, for
I think
luxury.
Here did a great job. I think they provide, I don't know, years back, there's some issues, and they provide, I think right in Seagrove, or maybe to their guests, but the lighter weight backpack chairs, which is a great solution opposed to.
Yeah, and like I say, I would see that as an industry adaptation, adaptation. They would, if that was the way that it went, obviously, regular guests, taking those wooden chairs down the beach, they probably would lose business. And so changing to a lighter weight chair might be the solution. But yeah, I appreciate that solution. John, we got somebody in the back. How about checking that microphone, see if it's still on? Got a battery signal on there?
How's that?
There we go.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with your comment about there's a big demand for beach chairs
Okay.
in 30A. There seems to be a big demand for empty beach chairs. on 30A. I will say I like your suggestion about distributing vending the beach chairs from the access, and I think part of the service would be to carry the chair down to the beach for the clients, and they would, pay for the rental and also pay a premium for you guys to carry the chair down to the beach for them. I think probably the biggest solution in terms of overcoming some of the issues with the beach chairs taking up the public beach is if they bring them down to the beach when the customer gets there. And that's where I have a question. What is the official rule right now regarding the ghost chairs? I hear that they're not supposed to set up unless they have a customer, but if that's the case, why are so many chairs empty from morning till afternoon?
Okay. So the way the code reads is you can't speculative vend on a public beach. And that means its original intent. You always got to think about code. What was its original intent? Its original intent was not to have people down there setting up empty chairs. So the typical business model that the delivery vendors use or have now is a weekly contract. And quite often that's an annual contract with a piece of rental property. And so they meet the definition of not speculative vending because their chair is rented. But their business model is they bring it down at 7 in the morning and they pick it up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And they typically will put a name and a phone number on the back of the chair so that the customer can identify where their chair is and be able to get to it. But their customer doesn't come to the beach all day long, and sometimes they don't come to the beach every day during the week. And so that's one of the things that we've worked with the industry to do is to manage the ghost sets. And some of the vending companies, what I call the medium-sized delivery vending companies, have successfully developed a program that their customer can let them know they're not going to be there that day. But it's a bigger jump to manage it by the hour. In other words, they set it up at 7, their customer doesn't get there till 10, they leave at 11:30 and don't come back till 2:30, and then they leave at 5 when they come get the chair. So
I should have probably clarified. I'm thinking more towards regarding the public beach accesses.
and that's what I'm explaining.
Yeah.
Is that the chairs are rented, their customer is simply not there. Because of the business plan is they set up in the morning and they tear down in the afternoon.
Okay, but there's no customer for that chair unless somebody happens to show up.
No, the chair is rented out for the week, or it's attached as an annual contract to our piece of rental property, and the agreement is they set it out for the customer or the client on a daily basis.
Ultimately, it sounds like you are sort of addressing that issue. It's being
Yeah.
recognized as something to address. And the only other thing I would add is if the customary use doesn't go in our favor, that means the space, the amount of sand at the public beaches. The amount of sand for the public could be reduced dramatically. And at that point, I'm wondering if maybe considering closing the public beaches to vendors might be something that should be on the table. Now that's far down the road.
Right, and all of it speculative thinking, and so we'll do what anybody would do is if and when whatever the outcome of customary use is, we'll have to adapt how we manage the beach for the public and how we manage the beach for the vendors. Keep in mind, like my original statement was that you respectfully disagreed with, is that there is a demand for chairs. I mean, I don't think anybody just wants to spend money on a chair they're not going to use. And certainly these guys aren't setting out chairs that they're not getting paid for. And I do agree there's a problem with ghost sets. And but the people that are using those chairs are the general public too. See what I'm saying? And I think that we can solve a lot of the problems that people have right now, the general public, mainly with Go Sets, is by some form of attendance by the vendor, be it a managed vendor program or a co-op program, but somehow where the vendor has to manage the product by the hour. So if their client's not there, they don't set the chairs out. And another thing that will have to change is kind of a culture in South Walton, because another thing that the chair at 7 o'clock does is it reserves a space. And I don't know if y'all have been paying attention to other things in South Walton, but it really confirmed to me that this is the type of society we live in when I saw a picture of the Seaside Amphitheater for a movie scheduled at 7 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, more than 2/3 of the amphitheater had blankets set out on it that were empty, people reserving their space. And so it's kind of like a norm that, you know, I'm going to go reserve my space and keep anybody else from enjoying that space in the interim because I want to have a space when the program starts. And so that's a culture we got to change, is that if you're going to the beach, you know, there may not be the choice seat for you right now. And you're going to have to assimilate yourself into the beach with the other people that are already there enjoying it, versus I'm going to save it myself or I'm going to have a vendor save it for me. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, do you want to stay on topic or switch to another subject?
I think we covered that one pretty good. You feel comfortable? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about storage, and I know that the storage, and there's a lot of conversation, but are there any requirements or regulations about storage next to the rare coastal dune lakes? I've called repeatedly about storage within a few feet of Eastern Lake.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was told that you can store within inches of a coastal dune lake even if a storm's coming and the water's rising. So I think we need to somehow clarify, because those dune lakes outflows are so ever-changing, we need to have some serious setbacks so vendor chairs aren't within feet of a dune lake.
Yes, ma'am. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Two issues, or a few issues at play there. Debbie's going to explain to us what the Coastal Dune Lake Protection Zone includes, and that we actually have some solutions in the system for this year to bring forth as recommendations. But some of the other problems is code enforcement can only enforce what there is a code for. Okay, so if there's not a code that addresses it, then our next alternative is to try to motivate the person to do what is I'll call good beach etiquette or good beach vendor etiquette. Another problem that compromises that is that vendors are allowed to store stuff in association with a vendor zone that we have at public beaches. And so at Eastern Lake, we're kind of compromised on land that we can use there. We have a 33-foot easement across the west side of the Russell property. And then we have I think it's 90 feet wide, Jay, is that right, the property we bought? So we brought the beach parcel of the head property to the west of that 33-foot easement. And we have a vendor zone on half of that. And so it sort of limits to where the vendor can store. So we recognize the plight of that coastal dune lakes outfall.
Because there is a authorized vendor storage that's not at a toe of a dune. It's basically between a house and some little swampy area that just fills up with water and the dune lake. And who placed, I'm just thinking that, do you have the power, the CDC have the power to remove that authorized vendor storage area, which is within, as you know, I've called twice when the vendor storage markers were underwater as a health hazard. So how could we get those vendor storage markers maybe removed so they're not constantly in and out of the outflow of the lake?
Well, so once again, the county commission tries to do what's right for all concerned. Okay, so part of that would be, allowing the vendor or making it so the vendor has opportunity to vend on a public beach. Debbie, or was it you that introduced the stuff? Yeah. So Debbie is a member of the Coastal Dealing Advisory Board, or the president of it. And there are some land development codes that address mainly what happens construction-wise in relation to coastal dune lake. Right. So in the future, there could be some verbiage codified that would mandate that we remove that vendor zone if it gets within this compromise position of the coastal dune lake outfall.
So that would happen with recommendations from,
Right. So in play right now, that'll be included in these recommendations that go forth is how do we manage vendors and other equipment adjacent to a coastal dune lake outfall. And it would be basically recognizing some land development codes or adopting them into the beach, the waterways and beaches code. That's another problem, not a problem, but our beach code enforcement department is tasked with enforcing Chapter 22 and a portion of, that's Chapter 22 of the Walton County Municipal Code. And then we're also tasked with enforcing the lighting section of the Land Development Code, the wildlife lighting. And so we're kind of, focused in on a couple of areas. And so other areas of the Land Development Code would actually fall, unfortunately, under a different code enforcement department. But when we come across those, we relay those to that code enforcement department. But I think that it should be. The coastal link outfall is on the beach, and so it'd be easier to revise our code or say beach code enforcement. You also need to enforce land development code. What is the coastal dune lakes? Chapter 13? Yeah. Right. Well, it says disturbance within that 50-foot zone.
Well, and it also says that you're not to encourage public, what is the word? Public use. Like they've been writing people up for code that are in their buffers, encourage public use.
well, the TPC has the two markers within sometimes inches.
Well,
Right. The coastal dune lake, that one meanders a lot. And, like I say, it's an attempt to balance, what is good for coastal dune lake outfall and also allow opportunity for people to use that section of public beach. So I think we want to be very careful of how far we say we're going to make this protection zone on a coastal dune lake outfall. Because if you go to any outfall on any summer day, there are families that play in that outfall, and they enjoy it.
That's part of the problem, is that the water itself in the outfall is not protected the same way the 50-foot is. So like the outfall itself, you can recreate, but you're really not supposed to disturb within 50 feet. And our other concern, which she hasn't addressed, is the vendor setups on the berm itself, because the lake is so unpredictable and can open, and it's dangerous. The other thing is South Walton Fire cannot traverse, and no one, the sheriff, no one could traverse when they set up too many setups on that berm when it's closed. So we've
Right.
addressed that with the beach
Yeah.
management committee in our recommendations.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next. Check the button there on the little power button. Make sure you get a battery signal.
Yeah, I had a question about code enforcement for the private property owners. Are they
Okay.
under the same rules and regulation as the public?
Some of the codes in Chapter 22 apply to public and private property. Some of them are different for private and public property.
Leave no trace, bottles on the beach, dogs.
All those are universal on the beach.
Okay.
Some things that are different are tents. So a private property owner can have any size of tent on any location of their beach. On a public beach, you're limited to a 10 by 10, top 1/3 of the beach. But those other safety and health issues are pretty much universal.
And then back to the outfalls of the Dune Lakes. Excuse me. I live off of Oyster Lake, and they recently redid the outfall there
Mm-hmm.
and improved it quite a bit. Is that area, the berm in front of that area, when it's closed, public access? Because there's been a property owner with a stake in the middle of the water.
Yeah, actually, that outfall is on private property. The house to the east owns 2 lots that take up most of the outfall, and the house to the west has a vacant lot next to it that takes up the other part of the outfall. So if you're in that outfall and you're landward of the mean high water line, you're actually on private property.
There was a time when you did not have tents on the beach,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, maybe 1 or 2 tourists complained, and then you came back and said tents are 10 by 10. And they need to be on the top 1/3 of the dune. That is still very confusing. There are many times I go to Blue Mountain Beach, and there's a mother with children with their tents right down by the water. And my solution is going to be on public property that we go back to the umbrellas. Some people may not like that. Some tourists may not like that. We need to tell Walmart and Target not to sell them. But the tents are still down at the water's edge. And unfortunately, they're down there, and code may give a warning. Then they're still down there, and it takes up the public access. But mothers want to be near children. We all understand that.
Yes.
But the tents on the upper 1/3 of the dune are not working fine.
You know, whenever we do a code revision, the first year we do it, we spend a lot of time educating people. And so I've advocated over the last couple of years to we've gotten the code fairly close to where I think it ought to be. And let's give it some time for people to understand. And so part of the problem on the public beach is because it's hard to know where the adjacent private property lines are. And so sometimes when people think that a tent is on public beach in a non-compliant fashion, it's actually over on the private beach. Other times, you're exactly correct. We spent a lot of time this year informing people that they need to move their tent. And, you know, most times people would move it. They would gripe and grumble a little bit, but they would move it and they would understand that it's part of the code. I think this year moving forward, that the code's been that way for a year, that we'll have a little bit better, or we'll have a better compliance rate. We have some other solutions for the regional beach accesses that we believe will help. Over the last couple of years, I've used beach ambassadors as what I call it in a static way at regional beach accesses, and that is to help people understand the code before they get set up, you know, while they're coming through the parking lot, down the boardwalk. Also to help people with beach etiquette, or what we call best beach practices that aren't actually a code problem. And so I'll be petitioning the board to resource us with more beach ambassadors that will act as basically like attendants at regional beach accesses to use in that fashion. And we actually get good results with that. If you can get somebody before they're set up, they usually don't have any problem at all. It's after they're set up that they, you know, give you a little bit of grief and grumble but all that. But as far as tents going away, I don't see that happening. There's too many people that, I mean, just as many people that don't like tents. There's equal amount of people that have to have a tent. so people can see over, or they don't block, people that are behind them. That was one of the main complaints, is I can't see, the tents become gypsy camps. I can't see through them. I can't see over them. The other problem is they take up space. They're usually used as reservation placeholders. So the top third seemed like a compromise. If you have to have a tent, you can have a tent, but you got to keep it on the top third of the beach.
This is more about the place holding. Has there ever been any thought of having the vendors, most tourists don't go out on the beach at 7 in the morning, changing it to say 9 o'clock, because I would say most vacationers go to the beach around 9, and that would help the place holding situation a bit.
Well, that sounds like a good idea. A few issues with that is there's a race to the water's edge every morning. In other words, people are going to get out there as early as they need to try to get that waterfront seat. And so, the vendors get down there. They start their day early in the morning, partly because of the heat. The 7-day visitor figure out that he's got to beat the vendor down there, and then everybody's lined up waiting for Turtle Watch to go by. If you put a restriction on the vendor, you'd have the general public setting up down there.
Would that be terrible?
Well, I mean, it doesn't solve a problem of people saving spaces. I mean, I think what there ought to be is, people come to the beach when they come to the beach and bring their stuff and put it up and take it down when they leave. Even if they go to lunch for 2 hours, maybe they ought to take it down. But once again, I think that's a cultural change we have to accept. I went to a restaurant in Colorado one time that would not allow you to sit down without your food. And it was the most foreign thing to me in the world. You had to stand in line, order your food. It was the order window and the pickup window. But you couldn't take your seat until you got your food. And there was a lot of grumbling going on, but it was amazing how well it worked to allow people to eat their food sitting down. The people would come in, they would try to sit down before they ordered, and there would be somebody in the restaurant, "I'm sorry, you can't sit down until you get your food." And like I say, it was foreign to me because, it's commonplace. I walk in, I get in line, my wife goes and gets a table. But we got to change that culture. I mean, our beaches, it's a problem of congestion. And so how do we do that? Once again, it may be just have an attendant. Another thing our beach ambassadors would do as attendants is they would let people know, hey, you shouldn't be saving a space like this. If you're not coming back till 10, once again, we don't have a code against it right now. I don't really want to make a code against it. I'd rather people understand it, but sometimes you got to make things code.
I'm just curious, what other beaches are we doing studies on to help this problem? Because I'm fortunate I'm able to travel all over, and a lot of these are marine-based tourism areas. I'll be on Oahu the whole month next month, and I can tell you that as packed as the North Shore is, that they don't have these problems because they allow people to have, use their common sense, and it's not so catered. Mm-hmm. It's not so, sure, it's a tourist mecca, and they don't lose money by not providing beach service. They have lifeguards, and that's it. And they have public beach accesses that you show up, you shower, you pick up your trash if you're somewhat of a good citizen and you're environmentally aware, but you bring your blanket, you go to the beach, and that's it. It's very simple. It's not so catered. And so the hard thing for me to digest, and like you're saying, it is a cultural change, but it always seems like it's catering to either more tax dollars for revenue for this county that, what I've heard, doesn't need any more tax dollars, don't know what to do with. But there's a growth of the public, like I was mentioning earlier, there's developments off of 83 and Thompson, and it's public. Like, when is it going to cater, or when is the public going to have the public accesses? And so if it's a problem, it's obviously the beach vendors on the beach, or us trying to cater so much to vending on the beach, when stop the vending and let people show up and just put up their tent, put up their blanket, put whatever it is, and let common sense take place on these. I mean, I don't know if that's a option or solution or what, but it always seems like years go by that it's beach
Yeah.
vending, beach vending, beach vending at the public beach access. It makes sense on the private, but when, and I'm very disappointed in fellow friends that aren't here kind of expressing this opinion,
Mhm.
because there's not enough people that are expressing the opinion of just having public beach access, that you show up, you bring your stuff,
Yep.
you remove your stuff.
Okay, very good question, and I think let me answer the first part is looking at our neighbors to see what they do. So our neighbors would be Okaloosa County, Escambia County, Bay County. In my travels down the south part of Florida, I've looked at what they do on their public beaches, and up here, a lot of beaches are done by this managed vendor program. They do it very similar to how resort communities do it. They have a vendor that they contract with in a form of a concession agreement. There's exchange of monies for the privilege to vend there. They got to vend by a set of rules. On other public beaches I've seen where there's large populations, and the population is more of a permanent residence than a vacation residence. So part of our problem now, or not problem, but part of the reason we have what we have is that our community is more rental-based property, transient property than permanent residence. And so while it's easy to make the vendor out to be the bad guy, the vendor is simply
I don't think the vendor's a bad guy. I think
Yeah.
the ideal of having to cater to the tourist every ounce
Mhm.
of to their feet touching the water, and not think about the public that do live here, the
Mhm.
small percentages that are already having problems. I think if
Mhm.
I had to express a concern from multiple friends or family or other locals, I think that's overall an aggravation.
It is. I'm saying it, and as we morph into more of a permanent resident population, you'll see a shift in how public properties are managed. So right now, there's members of the community, or there's a community at large, a rental community property that is not Gulfront, that has to have access to the beach, because that's why people come here, to go to the beach. And that's why there is a basic attitude of vending on public beach, is because there's a lot of property that's rental property that, I mean, if we cut that off today, there would be a lot more people in this room complaining that we have limited their ability to realize income off their property.
Do we have the numbers on how many, I guess, vendors are delivery, like just delivery vendors, opposed to like Ladolph J, you need a very established?
We do. It's
outright.
about a 30% vendor, 70% specific place.
70 is delivery? and 30
No,
is-
specific place.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, so when you talk about vendors, you're talking about vendors and vendor permits. If you're talking about, so some vendors have multiple permits. For your first specific place permit is $750, and each subsequent one's $50. Is that right? 50. Yeah. And so there's a lot of vendors, specific place vendors, that have more than one property. And so if you took out that ratio, 30% delivery, 70% specific place. And the delivery vendors primarily deliver to public property, but they also deliver to single-family dwellings that are rental properties, Gulfront. And I'm assuming that they do some where they take it to the property that's maybe not Gulfront. But still, our community right now is an economy that is based, I don't want to say based on rental property, it's based on tourism. But a big part of that is that most of the property that's south or north of 30A is primarily rental property. And those are the people that are coming to rent, that want to go to the beach, that really need the rental service because they don't want to carry chairs to the beach. And to answer your question about, do we have to cater to the tourist? It's a free capitalistic market. I mean, if the tourist is going to pay for it, there's going to be people.
But it's on public beach, that's a difference. I mean, we talked about that earlier.
But-
That's a difference of,
Yeah.
sure. I I don't leave my equipment down there all day and expect for it to be there.
But we're not, so that's just difference in business operations. The basic answer to the question is that if there is a demand that people are going to pay top dollar to have a service provided to them, then there's going to be people that try to do it. And until our population changes into a more permanent population that demands a quality of life, which you're seeing now over the last 15 years, all the problems that are being expressed and are being slowly changed are quality of life for people that have decided to live here. And so we just simply haven't got to that point yet. But it will. I mean, there'll be a point, like at the public beach in Hawaii, where there's enough people there that live there permanently that want to have access to that beach. And they've said, we don't think you as a county commission ought to allow vending on this beach because it disrupts the actual use of it. We just haven't got there yet.
I would disagree with those stats because it is majority tourism, but that's cultural and their respect for the ocean, all that kind of stuff. They've never allowed vending on the beach, but I don't know if there's really anything else to
Okay.
discuss on that.
That might have gone off. Man, lady in the back.
Anyway, this is back what you brought up. It's not with those chairs, but it's say you're in Seagrove and you're on Live Oak and Forest, so you're 4 blocks from the Gulf. And the house has part of the rental, you're renting $5,000 a week for this house, and it includes 2 setups or 3 setups.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way, I mean, this would be codified and to say that a rental house can't contract and include 3 setups that are paid in advance, and they're rented, they're paid for, and if those people don't like to go to the beach, they play golf every day.
Mm-hmm.
Those 6 setups or 3 setups are on the beach 7 days that week that the house is rented. Is there any way you could regulate the rental companies to not include setups in their rentals in,
Nope.
say, Seagrove or one of these areas that's a public beach, but there's a lot of houses north of the Gulf?
I mean, I don't think that anybody would want to make a code like that.
Well-
For a couple of reasons. Is you're getting into really regulating, a business in a form that I don't think that most business owners would seem acceptable. I mean, government regulation businesses need to be, somewhat reasonable and have a definite purpose. And really what you want in that situation is for the industry, the vendor industry and the rental industry to understand that there's a problem that's created by that behavior and that they need to resolve the situation. Not everything needs to be codified. And the other thing is whenever you make a code, the first thing you need to think about is the enforceability of it. And so how would we regulate that? I mean, how would you know which chairs go with which house and who's not doing it that day or that week or whatever?
Well, I know that I've been told that if it's rented for a week, Mr. Jones has rented this house and it includes 4 setups. Those chairs, if they're rented by the week, can sit at the toe of the dune for a week.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the toe of the dune is where the turtles nest. Whoever thought that storing all these chairs up and down Seagrove at the toe of the dune, there's sometimes on a summer day in Seagrove, and it's vendor, yes, there's half vendor, but if the turtle decides to go up into a vendor zone, he's got 50 yards that is solid chairs stored 7 days a week along the toe of the dune.
Okay, yeah.
The turtle doesn't know vendor, not vendor. He can't read the signs. And it's a mess in Seagrove, which is one of our few, by the grace of God, public beaches. But there are too many chairs stored on the toe of the dune in Seagrove.
Right. So I agree with you 100%. Storage at the toe of the dune, there needs to be a different solution found, either by building some racks that are attached to our boardwalks that are up off the beach, We already have a boardwalk there, so we've already compromised that nesting area. Why not have something attached or built within the boardwalk structure that allows for storage? Maybe an upland storage solution. Part of the problem is, and there are valid arguments to getting that product up and down the boardwalk at the same time the general public's trying to get up and down the boardwalk. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there needs to be some solutions found to storage at the toe of the dune. And this year, I think that we have some recommendations that are viable that will have some consideration for them. Yes, ma'am. Just a second.
I just wanted to kind of dovetail off a few things that have already been said. And one thing I will say is that I think that we create culture.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that, let me just use an example that's not here, just to take the personal investment out of it. Crab Island over in Destin. People have said, well, those vendors out there, it's a national seashore property. So same deal, it's public property, just not local, county or state property. It's federal public property. So that's our property. We all forget that. That's not the government's property. That's our property as citizens. And so I've heard people say over and over, both the elected officials there and the vendors, well, everybody's using these services. Clearly there's a demand for it. They need it. When for decades, people enjoyed that property the way it should be enjoyed because it's public, conserved property by just mooring their boats out and enjoying themselves. And if they wanted to bring drinks, they could bring drinks. If they wanted to bring food, they could bring food. And now we've got slip and slides and what do you call the things you slide on a cable?
Zip line?
Zip lines and all this stuff. It's a matter of time before somebody puts, I know it's going to sound crazy, but a floating hotel out there. So and this is public property. So the fact of the matter is there was a demand created. And in a lot of these places, like the gentleman up here was mentioning, where they don't have these things, like if you had somebody come set up tents on a beach, that local government would jump all over it, and they would deal with it and address it, and you would never create a culture of expectation of being able to use tents on that beach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, and there would have never developed a demand for it. People would have kept using their umbrellas or whatever. And so I think that's one thing that we need to think about is how we're responding to changes that happen and how we're having regulation in place that maintains the quality of life and the environmental protection of the area. And I also would say, I'll push back a little bit on the tent thing. When you said we need to give the regulation time to work, I would say we should have given the regulation change a couple years ago time to work, because we did change, and you could only have a small tent that would be adequate for protecting small children who are susceptible to sunburn. That was a great change. There was a lot of demand for it. And 1 year it was in place. And yes, if you make a change like that where there's an established expectation, there is going to be pain. There's going to be frustration. But now we had some pain and frustration, and we just gave into it. And I'm not directing this at you.
I understand.
I know you don't make the rules, you implement the rules that are made by someone
That's
else.
right.
So please understand that.
I
So
agree.
I'm talking
Yeah.
in general here. But I think that's become part of our problem, is that we've allowed and created this culture and enabled it, absolutely enabled it. So that kind of, I want to say, why didn't we give it a few years for that regulation, for people to get educated and get through the complaining and get people used to it? I think it would have absolutely worked. So those are some of the things that I'm having thoughts about as I hear the comments, and I just absolutely agree. And of course, I think most of us are on the same page about the storage at the toe of the dunes. Just gotta stop. But those are some general perspectives that I hope our elected officials will consider as they're considering these changes this year and in future years as well. Because we really, it's all about priorities, and we really can do things that and prohibit things that maintain quality of life. And not just, I will say this, I don't think it's just the full-time residents that have issues with these things. I think there have been a lot of tourists who have been frustrated by the ghost chairs, the empty sets, the claiming of the beach property parcels and all of that space and all of that. But you're less likely to hear complaints from tourists. What you're likely to find is they never come back. And so we don't ever hear their complaints, but the residents are invested and live here and will complain.
Right.
So I think we ought to consider the negative impact of some of these things to our tourists, not just our local residents.
Good point.
Thank you, Lee. I agree with you 100%. I want to get back to the tents, Brian.
Okay.
I think you did give up, not you personally, but the process did give up after a year. You just mentioned that you gave citations for 2,000 citations on dogs. Look how long we've had that.
Correct on that.
what-
It wasn't citations, it was contacts.
2,000 contacts,
Right.
okay?
Mhm.
Look how long we've had that. That's a privilege to have dogs on our beach.
Yes, ma'am.
Look at Bay County, look at Okaloosa, but yet we do, and we're trying to change the mindset. And I think we can do that with the tents. I'd like to see that still put down as a suggestion, that we don't have tents.
Okay.
And I'm going to give an example. Old Florida Beach is, it's difficult to tell who's really part of that community or not. They'll come down with tents. They'll go right up to the water. And as a volunteer beach ambassador, I can't say anything because I don't know what's right. But if we don't have tents, we don't have that issue. And I really still feel that tents should not be allowed on the beach, and I'd appreciate that if you still put that in on the suggestions without automatically taking it out.
Okay. Would that be on private and public or just public?
Well, I think with customary use, you're going to have to allow that owner to use tents, I believe. Am I right on that?
I think on any customary use or not customary use,
Well-
trying to tell a private property owner, that they're prohibited for a
Well,
tent.
that's great for,
What-
that's definitely what I
Yeah.
would say. No tents at all, and
Okay.
that solves that one. Except for the children, I think you had that in there, just a certain size for the babies. I think that was what you had said.
Yeah, we had a certain size tent that allowed for some sunshade for people that would need it. Okay? Yes, sir.
So right now, there's a ordinance, or not ordinance, but a code for canopies or tents. They should be on the back third of the beach.
Yes, sir.
dry
The,
sand.
yes, sir. The third of the beach, what we call the top, which is next to the dune.
Why can't we do the same for the umbrellas for the ghost chairs, make them back X amount from the wet sand? That would give opportunities for the public to sit in front of those chairs.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to put up an umbrella, you have to be back from the wet sand.
There actually is some suggestions of different feet away from the water's edge. Once again, it comes down to what I call the race to the water's edge, and who has the right to use that area of the beach. And the answer is everybody has the same right to use it, and so it does come to a first serve, first come, first serve basis. And we often have that at every public beach in the morning. Yes, sir. What you got to say?
Well, I mean, it's sort of cynical, but do I have the right to go take 50 yards of beach in the morning? But,
Well, but you have the right to go down and set up, your setup. And so,
for me and 50 of my closest friends. Anyway, back to what the young lady mentioned back there regarding the tourists, and you said, well, there's a demand for the chairs from the tourists, and that is true, and we do want to cater to the tourists, so our friends and neighbors can continue to make a great living down here. But you also got to think of all the tourists that are stuck behind the empty chairs. I would think for every empty chair on the beach, there's 10 tourists wondering why they have to stare at the empty chair. I think it might behoove the county, the tourism board, to do some type of informal survey to see what kind of opinion the tourists have, because I have been hearing a lot of negative input from tourists regarding the chairs as well. So it's not just the locals for the tourists as well, it's something.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anybody likes to sit behind an empty, unused piece of a beach equipment. And we've certainly identified that that's a problem. And I think we've got some fairly viable solutions to resolve that. And so I feel what you're displaying. Yes, ma'am.
If you went to a managed beach vendor program on the regional accesses and tell us how that would, I think you did, you told us, that would solve the ghost chairs. If it's a managed beach vendor, in other words,
Right.
you want your chair, you're not going to get it until you show up. So that would solve, am I right? We're solving the ghost problem by having a
Right. So components of a managed vendor program are attendant on duty, chairs or equipment doesn't go out until your client gets there, and if your client leaves for the day or for an extended amount of time, the chair comes out, off the beach. And so that basically gives everybody more opportunity to use the beach when they get there. And there'd be other restrictions of how many you could set up on any given beach, what type of space you would need to leave in between. I think one example would be 4 setups, so that'd be a setups, 2 chairs, and an umbrella. 4 setups, a 10-foot space, going parallel to the water as people came down to use them. And then I'm just saying that as the beach filled up, this is how this setup would go. And then the next row would be 10 feet in between the umbrellas. You'd start a new row or fill in rows as they come along, stagger the 10-foot space so that, people can still get down to the water.
50% of the regional beach access?
No, ma'am, in a case like that, we would say that we would limit, how many chairs could be set up on any given beach, and that would by, default leave some area for the general public.
Would that solve some of the issues that we're bringing up tonight, a managed beach? So those people who talked about ghost chairs.
Mhm.
What about the small neighborhood accesses that are like 25, 30 feet? Are you going to
Right.
allow vendors on those?
So on those, depending on how customary use happens, those accesses are going to be limited use anyway. The ones that come down in between private property, they're only 10 feet wide. Those accesses will pretty much get used to get down below the main high water line so you can traverse east and west. Other ones that come down onto large lengths of public beach, like in Sea Highlands and Sea Grove, we would propose that paragraph D8 go away. So paragraph D8 is the upland authorization paragraph. And we would put in more vendor zones in close proximity to the beach accesses. And that would give more opportunity for the people north of 30A that are using a vendor to have places to sit. It's hard to do the vendor program on the neighborhood beach accesses at public beach that's seaward of Gulfront property right now, mainly because of paragraph D8 and also because of the really hard to determine how much money it can generate. And therefore, people probably wouldn't participate in that program. Yes, ma'am.
So the managed beach vendor program sounds like something that's definitely worthwhile looking into and figuring out. The only thing I have a question about is, so it would be by contract or by companies bidding for that?
Well, the bidding out process is not the best way because there are some vendor companies in our area that have the ability to sandbag it. And so what we probably look at would be like a lottery system. So each vendor has, one name to put into a hat, and each vendor can only get one, what I call a vendor slot. So there may be more than one vendor at any given regional beach access. Like Inlet Beach has 1,700 feet of beach. Could easily handle 3 vendors. It's got 3 boardwalks. And so a lottery system would make it more fair. And as an alternative to the managed vendor program is the co-op program. One of the reasons there's opposition by vendors, delivery vendors, to the managed vendor program is because because of all the rental property north of 30A, it's going to take away their opportunity to service clients. Okay? Because right now, wherever your client is, you can maneuver them to a public beach because each vendor has equal rights to come down to the public beach. If you only have it one vendor, then you're taking away that person's opportunity to service that particular client. It's not to say that the client won't get serviced by somebody. It's that you're taking away opportunity from any vendor to service any client on any beach. And so with a hybrid program or a co-op program where the vendor industry has to provide labor resources to a regional beach access to manage the vendor sets like we've talked about in the managed vendor program. Sets don't go out until the client gets there. They come back up when the client leaves. There are certain ways you can set up the equipment and also having to police there and keep it clean. Storage it becomes in storage boxes versus stacked up on the dune, or maybe even storage in the upland area of the beach access to get it off of the beach and off of the dune. So that's another way to do it. That takes some input, definitely some unity in the vendor industry. They've already started developing a industry association, which would help move towards that. And I think that would be somewhat more palatable to the vendors that have a lot of clients north of 30A.
That explains a lot too. My concern had been that if it was strictly done by bid,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some of the larger companies that could much more readily afford that.
We recognize that. So, you know, that was when there's a lot of things that have to be figured out. The other thing of this managed vendor program is, you know, I think it needs to have a year to develop, to get all the kinks worked out, get all the components of it figured out, and that way the people that want to participate in it can continue on in the business, and the people that don't think that that's something they want to participate in, then they can, you know, decide to get out of the vendor business or change their, you know, seek more specific place permits where they're not delivering the product to the beach. And, you know, another way of doing it would be, let's do one access and see how it works, you know, and then expand on that or realize that that's not the way to do it. So, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you put the white boxes, and then there's a demand for the white boxes. You have to fill the demand. I don't believe that white boxes are that much more terminal friendly than just, I mean, a bunch of white boxes lined up across the toe of the dune, like a Bramble Road. I mean, y'all got land in there. There's upland land, store, I just use Bramble because that's the beach access I know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's lots of land there. There's space, and you could store vendor boxes on the parking lot, not on the beach.
Mm-hmm. You're correct. And so one solution we have, or one item that's coming up in this round of recommendations, is to increase the distance between vendor boxes. That by default will limit how many vendor boxes can be on a public beach. In previous discussions about allowing vendor boxes on public beach would be a determination by the TDC of how many it can handle effectively. And so that would actually be more than 20 feet apart. And if once the boxes are filled, then it's up to the vendor to get that product to a different storage place. But
how do we get input on the number of boxes, the spacing, the space, you know, who's going to be
Mhm.
defending the turtles when all those boxes are lined up?
well, the people of the general public like yourself that come to the meetings and say, Mr. Commissioner, I recommend 30 feet between boxes. I think you ought to consider 30 feet between boxes versus the 10 feet you have now.
Okay.
So right now, the Beach Management Committee has came up with a 20-foot distance. Currently it's 10 feet. They've come up with a 20-foot distance, and all product has to be in a storage box. And so the upland storage is a good solution. One of the arguments you'll get for it is, once again, carrying product up the boardwalk system at the same time the general public's coming down there. The argument is it's dangerous for the vendor employee, and it's dangerous for the general public that has to maneuver with it while it's coming up and down each morning and each afternoon. You know, maybe we need to do a actual study to see how much interaction there really is before we buy into any arguments.
I've never seen a vendor walking up and down the stairs with a
It's-
bunch of chairs.
It's because they don't, because they store it at the toe of the dune. But so I say, you know, but that's an argument that's been put forth by the vendor community.
I'd rather wait at the top of the stairs and let them carry the chairs down so I could get a spot at the beach
Yeah.
and
Well,
have a
well,
spot for the turtle.
I agree. So that definitely suits you. But then there's renters on the north side of 30A that are 3 blocks back that simply want to walk down to the beach and sit down in a chair.
But I mean, how long would it take a vendor to walk down the steps with some chairs? 30 seconds, 45 seconds?
Well, once
minute?
again, I mean that's a that's a time
Minutes.
study on when do people come to the beach and how many people are coming to the beach and all that. But I mean, my comment is that it works good for you, and I understand. But for the person that has 4 kids and wants to bring the kitchen sink to the beach, they just want to come down and walk straight down the boardwalk. They don't want to wait for a vendor. They want to sit down in a chair that's waiting for them, holding their place. And that's the culture that we're talking about we got to change. Or we don't. The people that come here and the people that live here need to. Yes, sir.
Couple of things, just to answer some of the questions. So when people say there's going to be boxes all up and down the beach, that's really not the case. A box will hold, 4 by 8 is the size of the box. Box will hold anywhere from, it'll hold max 40 chairs, 20 sets. Most of your regional access points right now, I think the most that you see on a beach, inlet beach, because it's 1,000 linear feet, so the most I've ever seen out there, we have a majority of the chairs out there, our company does, and that was at the most was 45 sets. So you're looking at 2.5 boxes to hold all those. And then the other vendors down there, there's only about another 10 to 15, sometimes 20 sets. So you're not looking at boxes stacked side by side all the way up and down the beach. It's a very large beach at most of the regional access points. Bramble Grove, which is Santa Clara access, I mean, it's a tiny little vendor zone, and it's a small public access because you've got Seaside on one side and on the other. And the vendors will stack. I've got 6 sets there. That's all I have, 6, our company. And other companies will have anywhere from 15 to 20 and so forth. But it can only hold, I think at the max I've seen it so far is maybe 50 sets stacked from, 15 feet from the water as far back as they can. And there's plenty of room under that boardwalk for some type of storage that's even off the ground where
Right.
it could go underneath, So it's not doom and gloom like the vendor's going to take over and put boxes everywhere and try to create a hostile environment for the turtles. No. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've seen turtles come up, go around boxes, hit the sand post or the fence post and everything else that's left on the beach. And then sometimes just there's nothing out there, and there's false crawls on a blank beach. So, I mean, I get it. The less on the beach, the better it is for the turtles. I understand that. But it just creates, waiting at the top of the boardwalk to bring something down for a guest. As Brian said, it is a culture that has come that people want instant gratification on everything. They want it done right then and there. They call and complain if I'm not there in 5 minutes. And it's a business, and we do everything based on cost. And some of the solutions that people have suggested are just unrealistic for a vendor, even a small vendor that's trying to make a living, be able to adopt that, to do that. Because they'd have to hire more people, and the only way they can do that is by raising their rates on the customer. And most of the small vendors right now are the lowest price vendors around just so they can get the business. We're not cheap. I mean, I charge more than almost anybody else in the entire county. And the phones ring all day long. We need chairs at this access. We need chairs at that access. I say no to Bramble Grove. I say no to half of the access points because it's too crowded already. I'm not going down there. You know, I don't want to turn down the chair, but the moment I put them on the 6th row, I get a 1-star review on Yelp. You know, and it's bad for my business. So I say no to the majority of it, but there are other companies that will just pack it as tight as they possibly can. And for those people being down there first thing in the morning, the vendor gets down there because, once again, it's a cost thing. Most of the delivery vendors also are permanent site vendors. So what they'll do is they'll utilize certain people, go set up as soon as the turtle watch is cleared, and get to your main property. And you have to be open by 9 o'clock because the majority of all contracts are 9 o'clock. And you have to have your set placed in there. If I didn't have to go down, the other point to that would be 9 o'clock. I'm fine with that, but I have to hire a whole new staff just for that purpose. And at that point, then I have to raise price and everything. But some of the other small vendors, once again, it comes down to cost. They're just not going to do it. It's going to put them out of business. So a lot of the rules and regulations that I'm seeing and suggestions are coming. You know, I've heard the county commissioner up there shoot down the beach management program because it'll eliminate the small business owner. So are these rules and regulations that are being put in place right now. I think they're more detrimental to the small business owner than it is for the big guy. So on the bidding process, or on the beach management program, I mean, I've had several suggestions, and I've thought many ways for this to work. Would be, we've got 26 miles of beach, and you've got different areas for these zones. You can break them down into zones to bid on. That way, one vendor won't have a monopoly and bid on every single one. Don't allow them to, type deal. Do some more research on that and find out how the other counties are doing it and so forth. But, I mean, Okaloosa County is your biggest neighbor there, but it is one contract, and it's only 2-3 large areas that he actually can participate on. But they don't let them bid, or they don't let them vend on the what we would call a neighborhood access. So there's no vending on any of those, but only in the large areas that would be considered a regional. But I like the idea of having it out there. I mean, having an attendant on a public beach, because I just don't see the rentals of the chairs going away on a public beach. I disagree with everybody else comment there. The demand is high. It always has been, and it always will be. 30 years ago, there was a demand for chairs on a public beach. And for 30 years that I know, never paid Walton County a dime to make money on a public beach, with the exception of the cost of a permit. That's it. And I'm all for paying what's due to the county. But the best way to do that is to have a vendor management program on those public beaches, have an attendant on the beach, have them accountable for what happens on that beach. Safety is a big issue that we've run into lately, especially on all these summer storms. As long as someone's down there, they can shut the umbrellas, they can educate people. I'm for having a guy out there and setting them up when the customer comes, because majority of everything I do at a public beach is based on the seasonal house. The house with 2 sets that come with it. Now, 95% of those people come to the beach and they use that 6 out of the 7 days that they're down there. But there will be times where they don't show up till 12 o'clock. I mean, the majority of the pictures and everything that are on social media, and everybody's talking about ghost chairs, they're empty at 7 o'clock in the morning until about 9:30, 10 o'clock. But at any given day, those chairs are occupied. They are being used. There will be an exception of a set here and there not being used, but majority of every last one of those chairs are used. And I'll go break down at Fort Panic, and there will be, I think I might have 6 or 7 sets there in the middle of the day, and somebody from the public has taken the set that's in front of them and just tossed it off to the side. And, you know, we'll politely go over and ask, is everything okay, and so forth. And he goes, well, yeah, I just started looking at the umbrella. Well, when did the guest leave? About 5 minutes ago. You know, and it's that culture that we're dealing with on the beach, and I look around and I see space 50 yards, but nobody's sitting. No one wants to walk, as soon as they come down the access, they don't want to carry all their beach chairs and umbrellas 50 to 100 yards to the east or to the west. They want to sit as close to the water and as close as the access as they can get so they can use the restrooms and so forth. And by eliminating a vendor from having the wooden chairs and umbrellas down on the beach, all you're doing is creating more people to buy their own stuff, take down to the beach, and pack it into the exact same spot the vendor was. And then at the end of the day, either they're going to take it with them or they're going to leave it at the toe of the dune. But a vendor will set up his chairs, clean up the stuff, pick up the stuff, store it at the toe of the dune, or remove it from the beach. So there's accountability there already, but there is no accountability on the turtles if it's managed. All right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Brian, have you investigated county managed beach vendor program, that the county would take it over at the regional beach accesses by county employees?
That option has been discussed. It will probably come as part of a option for what to do on managing public beaches. You know, counties and other governments are reluctant to get into business like that because they do take away from the free market. And you know, it's you know, it really, I mean, it's an idea, but like I say, it's probably a distant, you know, third or fourth. For that one very reason is you don't want your county taking over all your private sector service type businesses. You know, when the county decided to get into the road paving business, believe it or not, a lot of road paving contractors belly ached. And the reason is you know, they want to do business. See what I'm saying?
I do, but and the beach vendors don't shoot your arrows at me, but there's plenty of space out there for vendors on some of the private property. And I'd like to see that idea put down, that the county would be involved in that.
Yeah.
But when you mention a managed beach vendor program and starting it out small, I understand the logic to that, but it doesn't solve the ghost chairs that everyone is still concerned about. So, and I'm talking about the regional accesses, and we don't have a lot of property for people to go to. So if you do a managed beach vendor program, I think there's enough smart people on staff to set it out, go for it, get it going, get the ghost chairs out of there. Think about a county-owned program for those. You can try a county-owned and maybe on one regional and see how that works, but the rest could still be the vendors, you know, vying for the contract on that.
Right.
But that would be something, I would see that, I'd like to see that as an experiment, that the county would own one beach access. Maybe the new one coming up by Stinkies, and then you can control Stinkies not parking in the parking lot. That would even be better. But so that would be a place that I'd recommend that the TDC think about having a little bit more county control over that one in more ways than one.
Okay. Any more? Well, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Obviously, there's a lot of ideas and suggestions on how to solve many problems. Like I explained earlier, the next course of action on this is the Tourist Development Council meeting on October 2nd, and then possibly the BCC on October 9th, or possibly 2 weeks after that. But pay attention to your to the Board of County Commissioners agenda calendar and our website, county's website. All this stuff will be noticed on there. If you got any questions or comments, you can call or email me, Brian at visitsouthwalton.com. And my phone number's on the website. I usually have cards in there, but I forgot to bring them in. But everybody knows how to get in touch with me. Got any other ideas or suggestions? Send me emails. But the way to make change is you come to the meetings where change is decided on, and speak your ideas and suggestions. So, thanks, everybody. Oh. There actually is. So there's understanding that D8, paragraph D8, for y'all that don't know, is in the vending section of the code. There's a paragraph that says that any property whose southern border is contiguous to public beach. So they're describing Gulfront property that has public beach in front of it. Any vending to occur on that beach has to have the written authorization from the upland property owner. It was put in the code to appease Gulfront property owners where the beach has been renourished on the west end. It is argued that it should not have been applied to the beaches that do not have a renourished beach. But unfortunately, the way the code reads, it has to be applied to it. And so there's been some suggestions that it be removed from the code or not applied to that section of the beach. And so I think it's a logical thing to do. And I think that when you do that, you increase the frequency of the vendor zones and it spreads out, gives opportunity, for people that vend equipment and people that want to use vended equipment, and it also gives opportunity for people that want to use their own equipment.
Is there a section in that ordinance also that does specify like the waterways activities to where certain section is basically 30A eastward that you can't have,
There is, yes. So, right, so there's no water sports. You could, and so it would, it's just a matter of how it's worded. That it's very simple. It only applies to beaches that have an erosion control line, and so that by definition is a renourished beach. Yep. Any more questions, comments? Appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. Email me or call me if you got any questions or comments. See you at the TDC meeting.